Hi everyone, my name is Andy Evansen. Are you ready to explore the fascinating world of watercolor? In this lesson, we're getting awfully close to the most interesting part, so I recommend you just sit tight and pay attention closely for the next half hour. Get that little bit of a light tone on my boat. Let it start, even though I'm going to be covering up that reflection later with middle value, I'm letting it just kind of fuzz down in here. Okay, so just a little bit of raw sienna and burnt sienna on the front of that boat. And it can go back in the inside of it a little bit also. So looking at these areas, I filled that in with some color. Now I'm going to go and fill the back end of the boat that's in sunlight with a little bit of color. Just keep looking at this value study, the white paper, and then I'm looking at here, what colors do I need there later. Now I'm going to move up and get some color on this shirt. I'm going to use some alizarin crimson, cerulean blue. Just kind of get maybe a little bit of cadmium red. Just going to get a nice dusty pale violet. Maybe a little more pink alizarin crimson on there.
I have a question from Ginny right now about the paper. Why particularly rough paper? Is it because you're painting a water scene?
No, it's because Saunders is a really soft paper. I don't prefer rough papers when I'm using Arches or anything else. I like the cold press, but Saunders is a really soft paper that their rough is kind of similar to cold press paper. Okay, so I've got the light on this man, the pink, so I've got that filled in. I wanted a little bit of maybe some burnt sienna up by his face. Again, these are all just light versions of these colors. And on his arm, I want some burnt sienna on his arm there. So I'm filling in that space up there on his head a little bit. I'm going to zoom in on my guy real quickly here so you can see this close up. Okay, very pale yellow on the boat, pale pink for his shirt, pale burnt sienna for where his skin is. Tried to leave a little bit of white on where his head is going to be. The top of his head is gray hair. Zoom back out again. You can see everything. Okay, so I've got the light colors on that. The star of the show are kind of established here now. Now I'm going to grab a real big brush and get the water in. Kind of a mop brush. Cobalt blue, cerulean blue, maybe a little bit of that lavender that I like so much, Holbein lavender. Just keep it nice and simple, but a big puddle. This is a big shape. If you're doing this at home, you don't have to do it as large as I was doing it, a quarter sheet. You can work even a little smaller. All right, got my blue water. I want that to come right down and start connecting with my figure. Again, if I'm reloading my brush enough, I shouldn't have to worry about blooms and hard edges. Just painting right around that guy. That ore is going to be much darker later. Don't paint around the ore. I'm going to paint right through it. The reflection is going to be a little bit darker later. I'm going to paint right through that. We're just filling in all the light areas, the white paper from the value study. Whoops. Connect right to the front of his shirt there. Paint around the white front of that boat just a little bit. That ore is going to be darker also. Nice big brush strokes. So in addition to actually painting, I love teaching painting. I started during the pandemic teaching online courses, and it allowed me to reach a much wider audience, which was very exciting for me, being able to share my knowledge with a wider group of people. And it's also more convenient for the students as well. They don't have all the travel expenses. You can just stay in your own home and study right there on your computer. So if you haven't studied with me yet, or if you feel like you want to continue learning, I'm sharing my favorite free workshop with you now. So you can sign up via the link on this video and get a taste for how I teach. And hopefully you find it interesting enough to continue on. Okay, we've got that little bit of a buoy back here. If I want to paint around a little bit of that light, more water back here. I'll leave some of the light struck areas on a couple of those little boats in the background. I can paint right through that dark boat for the most part. I'm gonna come up into the shadow side of that motor a little bit here, but all that's gonna be darker later. I'm gonna leave a little bit of a highlight of that white in the water. Again, I know there's no such thing as an easy scene, okay? I tried to pick something with not a lot of drawing, a few simple shapes, and even then, it's a lot to tackle, I know. So don't worry about it, don't get intimidated. Have some fun.
Can you tell us a little bit about the brush strokes, Andy, that you use, how they vary, please?
Yeah, so I'm kind of carving around the shapes because my paper is damp. I don't have to worry too much. I'm trying to go side to side as much as I can because it's a flat surface. But when I get close to, the guy here, I was obviously going kind of up and down on him to go around his form just a little bit better. So and again, because the paper's damp, if this was dry paper and I was pushing all directions, you'd see that. But because my paper was damp, everything is just kind of gonna merge into a nice flat shape. So I'm not too worried about the direction of my brush strokes really on this part. I am still trying to go horizontal as best as I can. But again, I don't want to go horizontal on a bunch of small strokes and try and stop right at the edge of that guy's shirt. It's too hard. So then I was going up and down a bit. Does that make sense? I hope.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
And now I'm going to get just a little bit of those light colors in the background. Some of those, I'm going to switch back to raw sienna and burnt sienna and get some of these light pale greens and things on here that you're seeing up here. Just a little bit on the shoreline and stuff. And again, I want it to fuzz. That's why everything is damp. I put a little bench seat in there instead of that purple shape up above. So I'm going to just put a little wooden seat in that boat right here. And it can come down and fill all this. Is all going to get covered up later anyways. Same thing back here. We've got some pale colors on the shore where the boats are. And then we're going to be covering that up with middle value green later anyways. So again, this wash is just for getting rid of the white paper. I'm switching to a little bit of green, pale green up here, just because most of this is going to get covered up later with middle values, as you can see from my value study. All right, the light wash. Again, not really defining anything. You can see the little spots of color, obviously, the color shifts. But if I zoom in on this for you, you're going to see how everything is just fuzzing, wet into wet, soft edges, other than where I wanted a hard edge, maybe a little bit of the top of his arm there. I'm going to soften that a bit. I don't like how that's a white edge right there. I'm using a smaller brush now, kind of a synthetic brush. And I want to paint shadow side of his head. I'll zoom in just a minute here. I want you to kind of be able to see everything. Now I'm going to clean my brush off, grab some darker burnt sienna, and paint the shadow side of his ear and neck and things in there too. Connect that right down from his hair into his skin tone, the skin on the back of his neck, a little bit up there on his head. Zoom in. So the shadow side of his hair going right into the burnt sienna, shadow side of the back of his neck. Same shape that I painted on the value study. Now I need to go in and paint and mix the darker violet of the shadow side of his shirt. Same thing, kind of alizarin. And need a little bit more alizarin crimson on there. Cerulean blue, but I'm going to paint that back shadow side of his shirt now. Right down to his waders. The waders are going to be much darker later, so I don't need to worry about them. Get a couple of little folds in under his arm, on his sleeve. And I'm going to leave that lost edge between the bright part of his sleeve and the water. I wanted that there. The viewer will know where his sleeve ends and where the water begins. They'll just be able to figure it out. Their mind fills in those little gaps. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in on that again. You can see I'm going to leave a lost edge because they're both light. The top of his shoulder and the water. I don't need to have a white space between the two or a hard edge right there. Just let it be a lost edge. They're both light. All right, continuing down through his waders. Again, that's going to be a lot darker later, the back of his waders, but there's some kind of brownish value on the waders themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and start putting that on right now.
Andy, the first colors that you used were crimson and cerulean blue. Is that right for the shadow sides?
Yep. I put a little bit of lavender. I know not everybody has lavender. I put a little bit of lavender there too, but it's mostly just alizarin crimson and cerulean blue.
Thank you.
Now I added a little bit of burnt sienna and cobalt blue to that purple mix to change the color a little bit, and I'm painting his pants. And let that go right into the kind of the interior of the boat. I will say right now, I know, I get it. People are interested in colors, the colors that I'm using. Oftentimes it's not that important. If you want to give them a green shirt, give them a green shirt. People always ask, you know, what color was that? What color was that? A lot of times it doesn't really matter that much. You can just kind of have fun with color. It's more about painting good shapes and values. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in on that again, and you can see the lost edges from the back of his hair, to the back of his neck, to the back of his shirt, to his waders, to the interior of the boat. I need to put the little shadow on his, I'm going to stay zoomed in here. I need to put the shadow on the lower with some burnt sienna mixed into this and get the bottom part of his arm. His forearm is in shadow here, leaving again the lost edge up on the top, even though I had some white paper there, sadly, but and that back hand is there too. Okay, so that is also joining in with it. Just let it fuzz. His waders will be in there later. I'm going to stay zoomed in while I do a little bit more of this. You've got the photo already. You've seen that. I need to carry that kind of shadow shape into the back interior of the boat and then down into the shadow side here some. So right from his waders into the back end here, I'm just adding a little bit of blue to the mixture for that shadow. And let that be the cast shadow from him up onto the side of the boat. A little rim on the back end there. All right, now I'm going to start creating the back end of that boat, the shadow side of it. a little bit more. So I'm going to add some raw sienna and cerulean blue and cobalt blue and just try and get that kind of a gray, warm gray color on the back end of that boat here. And I'm going to lighten it up. I'm going to keep rinsing my brush and just kind of adding a little bit of water to this so it gets a little bit lighter as it starts working its way up towards the front of the boat. I'm going to try and leave that little light lip on the top of the boat. Again, rinse my brush off, add a little yellow, paint a little bit again. I want to just kind of slowly work my way up to where you've just got some of that pale yellow from the first wash up above. I'm just wetting my brush once in a while to get that kind of a softer transition from the darker middle value. I just kept rinsing my brush and adding a little bit more yellow as I came that way. I'm still painting that middle value shape. I just tried to create a little bit of a lightening up of it as I was going forward. Okay, now I want to connect that to the reflection. So I'm going to add some Payne's gray into that mix, darken it up a little bit. The reflection's a little bit darker than the boat itself. Payne's gray with raw and burnt sienna again. And I'm going to touch that bead and try and paint the reflection. Payne's gray, burnt sienna, raw sienna, just get a nice kind of a dirty gray here. Paint that reflection coming down. Now I want my brush strokes to start showing kind of ripples in the water. So as I'm breaking up that reflection a little bit, I'm going to make sure my brush strokes are kind of going horizontal to make them look like ripples. Same thing as the boat. I want to lighten up the reflection a little bit as it goes forward, just slightly. Not enough. And at the bottom of it, horizontal brush strokes. Okay, now I need to merge the reflection of the guy in with it, the purple of his shirt. Rinse my brush again, get some alizarin crimson and cerulean blue again on my brush. Touch that. So every time I reload my brush, I come back and I'm touching that wet edge. I'm not going to start jumping up and painting the other boat for a while here, okay? I keep reloading my brush, changing the color, but I just keep touching a wet edge and I'm painting the shapes as one big continuous fluid connected descriptive beautiful watercolor shape. That's what I'm going for here. A little bit of a reflection of his arm and stuff coming up. Change the color to browns and things on the back here. All right, so that guy with the boat, the reflection of the boat, the reflection of him. Right now, it's all one big, nice, connected shape, and it looks like you're taking advantage of watercolor. It looks like a painting. Okay, that's what I want. You can always come back in later. Remember that little barn I showed you at the beginning with the darks and how much difference that makes in the end. But for now, I'm trying to keep it big and loose and painterly. I need to start getting the ore in with this and can make sure that's connected also. I can always come back in and darken up more of it. I'll zoom out a bit now so you can start seeing things a bit better. But look at these two shapes I'm painting. This shape is that shape. I'm just changing the color a bunch of times in between, but I'm sticking to my game plan. Okay, I'm going to get that back ore, and then I'm going to start creating those little blue ripples in the water created by his ores splashing in. So I wanted this to kind of connect right back out. The back ore, a little bit of a reflection of the back ore down here. the reflection of the ore up here. All right, continuing on with my game plan. I'm gonna clean some of this off, add a little bit of blue. I'm using this smaller synthetic brush still to control the amount of water on my brush. I don't want to get too watery with things and end up with some blooms. I'm doing a lot of drawing of little shapes, so need to be careful. But I wanted a little bit of this kind of splashing back here behind him. Start carrying this out along the front, just like I did on the value study, painting that same shape. Can paint right through this ore for now. I can always come back in and darken that up later. Sorry, I'll zoom out again here. And again, the nice big horizontal brush strokes on the water, and that's just going to slowly connect up into the reflected shadow of the other boat. I need to get a little bit darker now. I'm going to add some Payne's gray and cobalt blue and stuff to this as I'm getting up to this reflection up above here. Still connecting. We can always come back and kind of darken up this boat more later if we want to. I might not need to. I want to really kind of keep the focus on the guy. So I'm going to darken this up just a little bit with some more blue and Payne's gray. Get a nice value on that boat. Okay, so that is connected in. Again, just kind of keep going back and forth. Look at these shapes that I'm painting. The exact same shape. I just keep changing the color on my brush. And I'm not painting over here a little bit, painting up here, painting over there. Every time I reload my brush, I go right back to where I left off. That wet edge, reload your brush, keep things wet. Okay, that's how you're going to get nice transitions of color. It's how you're going to avoid blossoms and blooms and all sorts of bad things. So keep working from a wet edge. But working this out ahead of time with that value study was so important. Even for me at this stage in my career, if I take the time to do a value study, almost invariably my painting turns out better. There's just too much going on to think I can just dive in and not work some of these things out ahead of time. Get some more ripples in the water there. It's a small connection, but it's still a connection. Okay, now that's going to go up and into the shadow side of that motor again. Add a little bit of blue, and it's kind of a violet-y color. And I can just kind of go right up through there and get the shadow side of that on. It's a little bit too dark. Brighten that up a little bit. I just rinsed my brush off, took some of the paint off, lighten up that color in there. I'm going to leave that top part of the motor towards the sun, the white of the paper there for now. And it looks like it really kind of changes to a warmer color on the right side of that shadow here. Kind of some bounced light up off of the bottom of the boat here. And that's going to connect right over into the background. I'll zoom in one more time on that boat back here so you can see the connections that I'm doing. I hope it's making sense. I know it's confusing and complicated. And obviously a lot of this is timing and how much paint is on your brush, all that kind of thing. But this is how I try and get that nice loose watercolor look in my paintings, by painting big value shapes, connections. All right, now I need to finish this up with some of that background noise. Try and keep it nice and simple. I'm going to add some raw sienna, quinacridone gold, or just burnt sienna, cobalt blue, just mix a nice green for that background shore area. Don't want to get too carried away with greens here. Too dull. But again, I want that to define the rest of the top of that motor, a little bit of shoreline in the background there. And it's got some reflection coming down, kind of changes to brown as it's sitting in the water. So I'm gonna add some burnt sienna and stuff to this and get that, and that's gonna come right down to the around that little bench seat. Help to define that better. The water. And the top of the boat is going to be defined by the reflection too. A little light rim on the top of the boat there. All right, got back to that green. I'm gonna maybe try and show the little water bird by painting around it some here. If I don't, it's fine. Like I said, I'll come back in and use some gouache. I just wanted to indicate a little thing back there. All right, more reflections. This is the reflection from the trees in the background coming across here. Just keep changing the color on my brush. Keep it nice and pretty. Fluid. Zoom in again. By painting those greens and browns of the shoreline. But the nice thing about that little strip of shoreline is it's defining the top of that darker boat in the background and the motor by painting around it. Okay, paint that same shape. And I'll just continue back into the distance and finish it off with those greens in the background here. How am I doing on time, Philippa? Am I okay?
Yeah, I think we're okay for the moment on time. Maybe we need
too long for people, but we'll get to some darks here. Maybe before we put the darks on, we can get to some questions, and I'll come back and kind of wrap that up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, how long do you think you have? How long do you think that you have left to paint?
Oh, there's probably about 15-20 minutes of darks. And that's about it. It's not going to take too much.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Okay. All right, I'm just painting those greens in the background. I use some raw sienna, some quinacridone gold, some burnt sienna, some cerulean blue, cobalt blue. Just mixing a little variety of. I don't have green on my palette. I just mix them. I'm just going to fill that in. Don't worry about, again, I didn't want this to be too much about the background noise here. It was mostly about trying to connect the figure, the guy in with his boat and reflection. All right, good enough. So I'll zoom out one more time. Look at these two, compare back and forth. Look at the two shapes I painted. Remarkably similar, following my game plan. I just, instead of using one puddle of gray, I just had to keep switching the color on my brush often. And it's already reading well without darks, without too many details. Okay, you show that to somebody, they know what it is. So that's a big lesson too. I think people are, and that's why they draw too much. They think that it's all based on all the small little detail things that you have to worry about. No, it's the shapes that read well from across the room, those big shapes. That's what your painting should be anchored in. Okay, the little details are just to refine it, give it a little bit more sense of life, maybe create some distance by keeping my darks in the foreground and simplifying them as they go back, you know, those kind of things. But if it's not really working too well at this stage, it's awfully tough to bring your painting around just by the use of darks and details. Okay, it should already be looking like something now. Okay, so I'm gonna set this aside for a moment, and we're just gonna find some darks on the value study now that we've got that big connected shape back there. So I'm gonna switch to a smaller synthetic brush, back to Payne's gray. I'm back on my value study. Thicker paint. Get this green off of here. All right, so now I've got the darks on the waders here, the suspenders. And I didn't have to paint around those. They're so much darker. I could just paint his purple shirt right through that. And now this dark is on top. I'll zoom in just a bit while I'm doing some of this for you. All right, so I've got those suspended. Now the back of his waders here. Bit of a shadow from his arm. A little bit of a dark back there with his hand and the oar. A little bit of a fold in his pants here, a couple of folds by his knee. Darken that up a little bit. I can darken up the bottom of the oar slightly. It's going in to separate it from the water and the reflections here. Maybe just a little bit of darker hair on the back side of his head. Darken up this oar a little bit. So now one of the main things is when you're painting that boat, I connected it right to the water and kind of lost that edge. But now I can come back in. There's almost always that dark at the bottom of the boat, between the boat and its reflection right at the water line. So now I can put that in and get my little bit of a separation back between the two. Kind of let that fuzz down here also. Get a little bit darker with a couple of his reflection marks of the reflection of his wader. Can be a little bit darker there. Just nice simple shapes. Don't want it too defined, it's just a reflection. Okay, so what happens when I put the darks on, not only does it add definition, but it starts to create space in your painting. That contrast visually, as soon as you start adding darks and contrast, those shapes come forward in the viewer's mind. So another thing that helps me with the use of these value studies is I avoid keep putting darks back in the background. Okay, yes, when I look at the reference photograph, there's darks in those tree shadows, and there's darks on the shoreline, and dark windows on those boats that are a quarter mile away. I don't need to add all that stuff in my painting. Okay, it's just going to keep attracting attention back, and it's going to kind of mess up that sense of space and distance that you're getting with the contrast. So when I'm putting my darks on, I try and reserve my darks to middle ground, foreground, and avoid putting them into the background. So I'm going to go ahead and darken up this boat just a little bit, the side of that boat. Sorry. And go a little bit darker with some of its reflection here. And then I think for the most part, I'm just going to stop. I don't want to keep adding detail and dark into the background. Okay, I want that to be sitting back visually and create that sense of space. So those are the darks that I found. Add a little bit of definition, define the guy's waders, suspenders. Back to the color version. Stay zoomed in a bit for now so you can see it a little bit easier. I'm going to add some burnt sienna to this mix. cobalt blue, and just kind of start getting a good color for his. And again, I'm going to paint that right on top of his that pink shirt. Didn't have to worry about painting around it. Put your darks on top. Only paint around things that are lighter in watercolor, not things that are darker. Paint right through things that are going to be darker. Paint around things that are going to be lighter. Okay, got the back of his suspenders there. The waders now, the backs of those. Same thing, I want to lighten it up just a little bit as it goes towards the sun. Just a couple of shapes on his pants here, those folds by his knee like I did before. Same shapes that I found on my value study. But because I painted my value study, it gave me a chance to practice painting a couple of these shapes. Okay, now he really starts to take form. Some of those darks. Darken up a little bit of the ore again here. Make that separation between the ore and the water a bit better. Go a little bit darker on the side of his head. I'll zoom in again a bit for you. I'm doing this. But what a difference the darks make. And that's why it's so difficult a lot of times for the students to make the connections and paint those big shapes. It's unnerving if it's not looking right or looking correct after the first couple of washes, but you do have to kind of trust the process a little bit and realize that once I start putting some of these darker shapes on, then it all starts to come together. Ear there, a little bit on the top of his head. Whoops, I just gave him a hat. I'll have to wipe that off. I had some paint on my finger. He's got a gull sitting on his head. Okay, a little bit darker on his hair too, on the side of his hair there. And I want to go a little bit darker on the bottom of his arm. That's a nice dramatic shadow. So a little bit of that muscle form of his forearm. Okay, so I've got those in. Get that dark at the water line of the boat, like I was saying. Make that little separation now between boat and water. Okay, so that's back. Darken up a little bit on that ore in the background here. Yeah, it's reflection a bit. I need to darken up some of the reflection of his suspenders in the water. Kind of with these back and forth type of brush strokes to make it look like ripples in the water. All right, so I've got that back. That's pretty convincing. I like the little reflection on the side of the boat from his oar. I didn't want to put that in before because it was still too damp. And I didn't want it, that's a nice crisp shape. So, I mean, not the reflection, the shadow from his oar on the side of the boat is what I wanted to put on here. I'm going to put this little shadow underneath the lip of the boat, like so. And connect it with the cast shadow from the oar coming down here. Fun little shape too. All right, I'm gonna zoom out, darken up that boat in the background, and we can wrap it up. A little bigger brush. I'm gonna mix some ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and with this kind of make a greenish blue for that boat in the background. And I don't want it to get too dark. I want to darken it up some, but again, I don't want it to overtake the painting. So I wash over what I did before, some ultramarine and raw sienna, just kind of go over the side of that boat one more time. And its reflection to darken up a bit of that.
Andy, I had a question come in about the reflections. Are they typically darker than the subject, the reflections in the water, or not?
A lighter object usually reflects a little darker, and a darker object usually reflects a little lighter, typically. Because the value of the water kind of dulls things a bit, so.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you.
Yep.
And somebody has asked, are all the layers on dry paper? Well, not the first layer, but the others, yes, right?
Yes, yep, that's why I used a blow dryer, because now once I go to the middle value shapes, I don't want that exploding and merging all over, because now I'm defining the boat and the reflection of the boat and stuff. So after beyond that first stage, I'm usually working on fairly dry paper, yes.
Mm-hmm. And is there a story behind this image that you have?
Yeah, I was teaching a workshop in Cape Cod in the US. I did a larger painting of this gentleman. It's on my website. I think it's called the End of the Day or something, or My Work Is Done. But I was doing a demonstration painting for my plein air class right by the water here of a bridge. And while I was painting and talking, this guy rowed up in his boat, and all my students were taking pictures of him. So of course I grabbed my phone and took snapshots of him too as he was coming in. And he was great. We chatted with him for a little bit, just an old fisherman coming in at the end of the day. But yeah, I like I said, I'd done another big version of this painting, a little bit different scene. He was already out of his boat and kind of hauling it to shore. The painting that I did of it previously, but I just thought it'd be kind of fun to revisit that with you all. And again, I was trying to find something that with just fewer, simpler shapes, nothing too complicated, but I mean, there is no easy thing unless you just want to paint an apple or something, and even an apple can be difficult. So I hope this wasn't too difficult for students, but the main thing is just trying to find something with, somebody asked that question before, good sense of light and light side, shadow side, the reflections, connections. I was really trying to find a subject that incorporated all that, so you could kind of see all this come together. And in the lessons of the even though it's a beginning workshop, and I know this can look a little intimidating, but the lessons that we for that workshop that we're advertising here, it's one boat, the same thing, kind of connecting the boat with its reflection to the water, using the background to paint around the highlights of it. Another one's a little farmhouse, kind of the same process, value studies, that whole process of trying to think in terms of value and not color. I don't think I do value studies on there, but I talk about it. So, okay, that's it. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If you found it helpful, please subscribe to our YouTube channel using the link in the video here, and continue immersing yourself in the wonderful world of art. In addition to myself, there are many talented instructors on the YouTube channel here through Artefacto. So I hope you enjoy.